the big question is this: how do pastors like us who remain focused on the mission of Jesus and serving our communities without being distracted by everything in the world around us, how do we increase our effectiveness while living a lifestyle that doesn't compromise our health, our families, or our personal relationships with Jesus? That's the question this podcast is going to answer. I'm Dr. Brandon Party Cooper, and welcome to the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of the Ministry Hackers Podcast. Have you ever wanted to be able to tell the future or predict the future? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that today in this episode of the podcast. Before we do, I want to let you guys know that I have switched over the podcast onto the Anchor platform. So if you're not familiar with Anchor, it's a platform that helps produce podcasts, but then also you can listen to podcasts on there. One of the nice features, and one of the reasons that I switched over to it, is because if you listen to the Ministry Hackers Podcast on Anchor, you can download the app to your phone. If you listen to it on there, you can actually, there's a button right there in the podcast where you can leave myself or Pastor Matt or any of our guests, you can leave them a message and we will respond back or get back to you, or maybe even use your comment in a future episode. And so if you've ever had a question, or if you've ever wanted to say something or leave a message for anybody here on the show, then now you can. Just go on there to the Anchor podcast app, go to the Ministry Hackers Podcast, and just hit leave a message, hit that button, and it'll just leave a quick voicemail or voice message, and it'll come to me, and I will get it out to whoever needs to get it. And again, if you leave a question, then we'll work that into a future episode. So I'm excited about the new platform and some of the tools that it gives us. It helps us to serve you better as listeners and viewers. And so yeah, I'm excited about that switch. And so I would love to get messages back from you and hear what you have to say and hear some questions that you have. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, you can see that today I am wearing my Marvel Avengers t-shirt. It has lots of different Avengers on it. And quite honestly, this big red guy here, I have no idea who he is. And so if you can help me and really just help my boys, I have 3 boys, 6, 3, and 1. The 6-year-old and 3-year-old are dying to know who the big red guy is on my shirt, and I have no idea who it is. So for all of you superhero and comic book nerds out there, if you can help me out, that would be wonderful. You would be their hero for sure. So if you can just help us out there, that would be great. And again, those of you who are listening, if you're not aware, we are on YouTube. And so you can go on YouTube, look up Ministry Hackers, and the podcast should show up. And so you can check it out there as well. So in church and in ministry, when the conversation about leadership comes up, we often talk about servant leadership. We talk about how Jesus modeled servant leadership for us, showed us servant leadership. When we look through the Gospels and we see the things that Jesus did and how he approached leadership, we clearly see him using a servant leadership model. Now, servant leadership as an academic model of leadership didn't come around until the early to mid 70s, wasn't identified until then by a man named Robert Greenleaf, and he kind of hashed it out. But the reality is for all of us who are in the church and who are pastors and ministry leaders, we can look in Scripture and see that long before Robert Greenleaf came along, Jesus was operating using a servant leadership model. And we see this throughout the Gospels. One of the things, though, I believe that we as ministry leaders and pastors often overlook or miss completely is that one of the aspects of Jesus' servant leadership model or practice, one of the things that we miss is that he operated with a level of foresight. And what foresight means is simply, foresight is simply looking to and thinking about the future, thinking through what is the future going to be? How is it going to look? When we look around us today, where is that leading us? And Jesus talked a lot about that throughout his Gospels. He talked about the kingdom of heaven. He talked about the future, things that were coming for the disciples, things that were coming for the church down the road. He talked about those things and taught around those. And he didn't just focus on today, the present, the moment that they were in. We even see in Luke 12, 54 through 56, it says, he also said to the crowds, when you see a cloud rising in the west, you say at once, a shower is coming, and so it happens. And when you see the south wind blowing, you say, there will be scorching heat, and it happens. And then he goes on, he says, you hypocrites, you know how to interpret the appearance of the earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time? And the criticism that Jesus is throwing at the crowd is you're using your skills of foresight to become good farmers, to know what the weather is going to be, to understand how your crops are going to grow and what you need to do. You're using this tool or this ability to be good at farming, but you're not applying it in your spiritual life. You're not applying it in your personal life. You're not using it to understand what is happening around you. And even looking at the context of first century church and Jesus and the crowd that he's speaking to, there were a lot of things going on that were showing what the trends were going and where it was leading. And Jesus was trying to get the people to understand what was coming and help them to know how to prepare spiritually, how to prepare themselves for the coming changes that were down the road. And that's exactly what Jesus is encouraging us to do today. Is how are you using your foresight skills? How are you using them to understand the things that are coming and what is happening down the road? Now, here we are in 2020, and any of your foresight skills that you may have practiced beforehand, any of your trend analysis, or any of your forecasting projections, anybody that has done any of that knows that in 2020, all of that went out the door. None of us were able to predict what was going to happen and how things were going to go. However, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't practice foresight. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't put the tools in place to be looking down the road and understanding the coming occurrences and the coming events that are going to happen. We should always, especially as leaders and as pastors, we should always be applying foresight skills to try and understand what is happening down the road, 5 years, 10 years down the road, next year, so that we can prepare and plan. Now, a lot of us, we do an annual calendar. Many of you are probably sitting down right now, September and October, trying to plan out 2021 and trying to understand what to do, again, in the midst of a lot of uncertainty and a lot of things that we don't know how things are going to play out over the next 6-8 months. But we're trying to plan. What foresight is it's taking planning one step further. We're not just looking at 1 year, we're looking at several years. For instance, looking at where we are today and what is happening with maybe your attendance or maybe your giving, what's happening with maybe a building project that you have, whatever, looking at that and trying to say, okay, in 2 or 3 years, where is that going to lead us? Or how do we need to pivot now in order to prepare for that? And so what I have found, though, in ministry and in pastors is that a lot of times we just choose not to think ahead. We choose not to exercise foresight. And sometimes that's because we don't want to we're unable to get out of our business. We're unable to lift our eyes up. We're so stuck in all of our challenges of day-to-day tasks and meetings and interruptions and all that. Our heads are always down looking at the next thing. And we're not able to lift our heads up and look out over the horizon and understand what's coming. I like to think about foresight as when you're driving. When you're driving, especially when you're driving in lots of traffic, you have the ability to see the car in front of you. And if, some of you, you get behind a truck or a big SUV or whatever, that's all you can see is that car right in front of you. And so you're really at the mercy of whatever you see that car do. If that car slams on its brakes, you immediately have to slam on your brakes because there's no forewarning other than just seeing the car in front of you. Now, for some of us, when we're driving, we're actually able to maybe to see around that car, or, a couple of things that I learned to do is I look through the windshield to the car in front of them and even the car in front of them, if it's possible. At nighttime, sometimes you can see under the car and see the taillights of the car in front of them. And so if you see the taillights go on in the car in front of them, even though the car in front of you hasn't hit the brakes, the car in front of them is hitting the brakes, the car in front of you is about to. And so you can hit your brakes long before the car in front of you does. That's essentially what foresight is. And so what we need to do is stop looking at what's right in front of us, the task, the issue, the meeting, the challenge, the problem, whatever is in front of us. So we have to look, we obviously we have to deal with that, but we also have to start practicing looking farther out. After this problem, what's next? And what's after that? And what's after that? And how can we plan 2, 3, 4 challenges and 4 problems away so that we are able to anticipate and make better decisions and ultimately set up our church and our congregations set them up in a way that we can be more effective, advance the kingdom of God, and reach our communities. A couple of distractions that we have with foresight, obviously busyness. We're just so busy, it's hard to do that. It's hard to look forward. But the biggest thing that I find is just a disinterest, this attitude or this perspective of, I don't really want to look too far in advance. I don't want to plan too far in advance because those plans may change. And so I'm just going to plan for now. And that's good. But the reality is do you plan for your church to be where, do you plan for your church to be operating 5 years from now? Because if so, then start thinking about what that looks like 5 years from now. What does that look like in 10 years? Because the plans can always change, but without a plan, we're constantly reacting to what's next. In order to practice foresight, though, one of the biggest things is we need good data collection. And it's not just counting who's in the sanctuary on a Sunday morning, but it's figuring out what other important data pieces there are. Also, keep your eye on the horizon, like we talked about. Look out, look forward, look beyond the problems today. Look beyond this year. Look deep out. Even if you're in some level guessing, don't keep yourself from looking forward, because even in your guesses, you're able to narrow down options and have an idea of where you want to go and where God is leading you. And then the final thing is just have feet ready to run. Change happens, and as we've seen in 2020, change happens in an instant. And so we need to be ready to make the shift. We need to be ready to switch. We need to be ready. If our feet are in the mud and we're not able to get going, then we're not able to react and we're not able to adjust to the challenges that are coming. And so foresight is obviously it's a huge benefit for those who practice it. And I know that some of us are a little hesitant with it, unfamiliar with it, but quite honestly, any church that had the foresight to plan for an online presence, any church, any pastor that had the ability to had the foresight to plan ulterior meeting places and options, those churches are the ones who have pivoted well and who have been able to navigate through these last few months with relatively low impact on their congregation, on their giving, on all those things. The churches and the pastors who stuck their feet in the mud and said, this is the way we're doing it, and we're not adjusting, and we're not going to do all these newfangled things that are out there. Well, come March, they were dead in the water trying to figure out what was next. And so I just want to encourage you, understand foresight, practice it. If you have any questions about foresight, my doctorate is in that. And so I would be happy to answer those, happy to help, because the future is very uncertain. But the more we can kind of figure out what options are in front of us, at least we can narrow down our focus and plan for the options that are coming. And so I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next episode.